I see it every time I close my eyes. I hope you can help me, because otherwise I think I might go insane." Dr. Winters nodded, her back to the man, as she made tea. "Well, that's what we're here for, Mr. Garvey. Would you like some tea? It's a specialty of the clinic. I find it sometimes helps with the forgetting." Garvey chuckled. "With all due respect, ma'am, if I could drink these memories away, I would have done it weeks ago. I will take some, though. It smells so unique." He blew on it, making the steam dance, and Pamela smiled as he took a tentative sip. "It's ginseng and winter cherry. It's supposed to promote memory recall, so you can get it all out and forget." He had looked unsettled when she had said recall, but he breathed a sigh of relief when she talked about getting it up so that he could forget. "Let's start at the beginning," she said, taking her seat and smiling at him. "Well, look, before we start, this is one of those things where if I accidentally admit to a crime, it's covered under patient confidentiality, right?" Winter laughed. "You certainly wouldn't be the first to admit to something unsavory, and yes, my lips are sealed." That wasn't true, and she knew it. But as long as he wasn't about to admit to anything involving children, she wouldn't tattle on him. Humans had been killing each other in new and interesting ways since before this one was born, so why judge them for it now? "Okay, well, this happened a couple of months ago, back in January, and it's something I doubt I'll ever forget. I was going through Tennessee, trying to make my delivery before I got snowed in, and that's how I came to be in the Appalachians in the first place. I've been driving big rigs since I was 22. It's the only job I could see myself doing. There's something about being behind the wheel of that monster, knowing it's just you in the open road, that makes me regret that I ever climbed out. I have a house, not a big one, but a house, where I keep my stuff, but that's never been my home. Behind the wheel of my 18-wheeler, catching the scenery pass by, falling asleep in the back, and knowing that I get to do it all again tomorrow has always been the closest thing to home for me. It's probably why I never married. No women, no rugrats, nothing could ever compare to that truck. Anyway, I'm just waxing on. That's not what you want to hear about. I should have known better than to take my truck through that pass, but I was on a deadline and I needed to get there. The road would have saved me 2 hours of highway driving on a good day. As it turned out, it cost me a whole day. I could see the flurries as I drove, and I should have known better, but I just told myself that I knew what I was doing. I took the mountain connector and never looked back. Higher I went, the thicker the snow got. I had good tires, though, and this wasn't my first time trucking in the snow. I did, however, slow down, and that was what I'd hoped to avoid. It was just after lunch when I started up the trail, and as the sun set and I found I still wasn't even halfway through the pass, I started getting nervous. There'd be nowhere to pull over on the pass. It was 2 lanes nearly all the way, and I would have no way to safely sleep up there without possibly getting hit by another vehicle. I decided to push on, but as the blow came past my lights, I started getting worried. The guardrails were covered in snow, and it would be all too easy to go careening off the edge of the pass into the weather. I wished I'd just taken the highway, but it's too late to regret now. There's no way to turn around, no way to reverse back down the mountain. It was succeed or fail, and failure could be catastrophic. As the snow blew, the warm cab hummed amicably. I found it hard to keep my eyes open. It was so warm, and the energy drinks were doing nothing to keep my eyes from snapping shut. My lack of sleep was starting to catch up with me, and when I blinked a little too long, I thought I saw something that couldn't be there. Standing in the road, looking like a deer in the headlights, was a man in flannels. His shirt looked like a stop sign. His eyes were as large as dinner plates, and I knew I would never stop in time. I tried, but not a lot. I knew it would take me over the edge if I started sliding, and as I kept rolling, the man disappeared without a bump or a bang. I shook my head, breathing heavily as I looked fitfully for any sign of the guy. There was nothing, though. No smear behind the truck, no body in the snow, and I shook my head as I came to terms with the error. I'd fallen asleep behind the wheel or seen something that wasn't there. It was easy enough to consider as my adrenaline ran heavy and my mind looked for answers. I'd been driving for 16 straight hours, riding most of the day on energy drinks, and it wasn't unthinkable that I had hallucinated. Could have been nothing. Could have been a deer. It could have been a pothole. As I kept driving, I told myself it was nothing to worry about. I had dozed off for a second and had a bad dream. Thank goodness I had woken up before I drove off the side of the damn mountain. I kept going, kept plugging away, but I think that was when I first noticed the sound. It was loud enough to hear over the rev of the engine, but subtle enough to be all the spookier. I didn't always hear it. Sometimes I would go miles before I heard it, but it sounded like something scratching at the underside of the cab. It wasn't like someone trying to burrow their way in or anything. It was honestly easy to miss if you weren't listening. It was 3 long scrapes, and then it was silence. Sometimes it was every minute. Sometimes it was every few minutes. Sometimes it was once an hour. It persisted all night, but I told myself I had picked up a stick, that was all. I'd run over a limb in the snow and was just dragging it behind me. Snow would clear it up and it would dislodge soon. The longer I drove, the more the wind began to sound a little too human. The wind had buffeted the truck since I had ascended upward, but as I came back down, it began to get a little better. Without the blowing wind to cover the cab in snow and ice, I started hearing something in that wind. It was faint, almost inaudible, but it seemed to creep into the cabin and it sapped all the warmth out of me. "Help!" it wailed, a ghostly nail against my spine. The first time was easily put aside. It's just the wind. It was just my nerves. It was all in my head, and I'd be fine once I got off this mountain. An hour later, as the words became clearer and clearer with each iteration, it became harder and harder to ignore. Paired with the scratching, the blinding snow, the difficulties in keeping my eyes open, it all came to a head as the dark road stretched on and on. Should have been off this mountain by now, but that snowy road just went on and on. Was I still dreaming, I wondered? Had I run off the side of the mountain, and this was purgatory that came afterward? I kept my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road, praying that the mountain would end soon, and I'd escape whatever strange world I had found up here. All the while, the nails scratched and the voice wailed. I began to shake the farther I went. I thought about stopping to check, but as the grade became steeper, I wasn't sure I could safely do that. Plus, I was a little scared about climbing out to have a look, afraid it was a trick. I wasn't afraid of getting robbed or nothing, but I'd grown up with stories of haunted Appalachia. In my susceptible state, the idea that I had pissed off some mountain spirit seemed very real, and I plowed along at a suicidal speed, hoping no one had broke down ahead of me. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I finally came off the mountain, and I'd never been gladder to merge with traffic in my life. It felt safe to have other cars around me. Felt like maybe the cries for help and the scratching might go away now that there were people around again. The farther the mountain grew behind me, the more I thought I had escaped whatever spirit I had angered up there. But I was wrong. It waited until my hope was at its highest. Then I heard it again. 3 long scratches, followed by silence. I almost ran into the car in front of me, my brakes barely stopping in time when the tail lights flared to life. It wasn't possible. I was out of the mountains. I turned on the radio, fearing I would hear the voice next, but it was just the scratching after that. I had found a country and western station, but nothing seemed to drown out that scratching. I switched to a rock station, something a little louder, but I could hear that scratching even over the loudest vocals. Nothing I did seemed to help, and I suddenly remembered that I had the headphones I sometimes used for the CB. They'd block out the sound. They'd block out almost anything. As I slipped them on, I was left in a world of muffled silence. Then, as if something were scratching right within the hard plastic, I heard 3 long scratches, followed by silence. The left ear of the headphones broke when I threw them violently off me, and I put on my hazards as I pulled over to see what had gotten stuck under my truck. I knew it had to be something making that noise. My truck had never made a noise like that before, and if I dislodged the branch or the root or whatever, I could show myself that it was something normal and no ghost or goblin after all. I put on my heavy coat and my thick wool hat before I reached for the headlamp and the glove box for good measure. Then I kicked open the door and grabbed the handle beside the cab. Last thing I wanted to do was bust my ass in the snow as I stood beside the road. When I came off the step, I planted my feet on the ground and saw something else that might be useful. The broom was something I used to sweep out the cab sometimes, but I thought it might work to dislodge whatever had become stuck under my truck. I could feel the snow sopping into my jeans as I took a knee, and as the headlamp came on, I looked for the source of the noise. There's no branch or root under there, but when I found the source, I did a little screaming of my own. He'd gotten wedged under there somehow. His arms tangled in the metal handles under the cab. He'd been dragged, that much was clear, 'cause his legs were little more than shattered nubs. He had indeed been wearing red flannel, and it had gotten hung under the cab as well. His eyes stared at me, almost accusingly, and it took several minutes to get a hold of my nerves. What was I going to do? I'd killed somebody. I'd run over him like an animal, and now I'd have to face the consequences. They'd send me to prison if I was lucky. If I wasn't, they'd still send me to prison, but only until it was time to give me the needle. No, I thought I wasn't going to let this stranger ruin my life. I jabbed him with the broom, hoping he would just fall out, but no luck. I poked at him some more, begging him to just fall off, but he was stuck tight. If I could dislodge him, I could just leave him in the snow by the side of the road. They wouldn't find him until the snow started to melt, and by then, all the evidence would be gone. No one could ever link me to this, and I could continue to go about my life as normal. "Get out from under my truck," I growled, jabbing at him with gusto. I didn't think he was going to come out for a moment, but after a particularly vicious bit of jabbing with the broom, his arm detached and he fell wetly to the snow. Didn't take much manipulation after that to get the arms unfolded. And then he was in the snow with his pieces scattered around him. I felt a momentary wash of guilt, but I pushed it away as I climbed back into the cab. Who went hiking up the road in the snow anyway? He'd been a fool who was walking up the snowy road in the middle of the night in a snowstorm. As I pulled away, I breathed a little easier when I saw the snow beginning to cover him. To the average passerby, he would just look like a bag of garbage that someone had tossed out on the side of the road. I drove for another hour, fighting sleep the whole way, till I found a rest stop far enough away from my crime to be safe. I pulled in and secured my cab and prepared to get some shut-eye. I could squeeze a few hours of sleep out and only be a little bit late to drop off my cargo. After all, the snow had slowed me down, right? I had settled in the sleeper cab, already fallen into sleep that would definitely be deep enough for me to ignore my alarm, when I heard something I couldn't ignore. 3 scratches on the underside of the sleeper cab. I sat up, looking around as if someone might be in the cab with me. It wasn't possible. I'd gotten rid of him. There's no way he'd be scratching at the bottom of my cab. It wasn't possible. I was imagining things. I told myself I needed sleep. I needed rest. I just needed some shut-eye. And I would help. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't imagined that. That had sounded like it was in the cab with me. Help! I was shivering, my teeth chattering, and the scratching had started again. I pulled the covers up over my head, trying to block it out, but no matter what I did, the phantom words always found me. I was crying as the scratching increased in frequency, and soon it was a constant scrape, scrape, scrape of nails on the bottom of my truck. I was shaking and crying and trying my best to pull it together as the sound of my ghostly passenger cascaded over me. I closed my eyes, pulling the covers over my head as I tried to block it all out. I was imagining things, I told myself as I sat shuddering beneath my blankets. This was all just a hallucination. I was sleep deprived and caffeine overindulged. I'd eaten a bad gas station hot dog that morning, and this was the result. There was nothing otherworldly at work here. It was all nerves and stimulants. There was more gravy than of grave of this fella. Help! I jumped at the voice as it echoed through my skull, and suddenly I couldn't take it anymore. I was out of the cab and running, looking aside as I ran for the rest stop information center. I pounded on the door until somebody came to answer, and I must have looked frantic because they agreed to let me in to call the police. I sat in the office and sipped at the water he had brought me, shaking like an old man as I awaited my fate. I told the police everything when they arrived, skipping nothing and telling them every incriminating detail. From the start, the police were skeptical of my story. They too thought it unlikely that someone was hiking in the mountains at night, in a snowstorm no less, but said they'd go check out the site of my body disposal. They left an officer with me while they went to investigate my claim, and about an hour later they came back to ask me how long I'd been driving without sleep. I told them it had been nearly 24 hours, I guessed. They said it sounded like I'd been hallucinating. We didn't find anything out there. No body, no arms, no sign that you even pulled over to dislodge something. We checked out your truck too, and there's nothing to suggest that you had a body stuck under there. We advise you to get some sleep, and hopefully you'll feel better. I told them I would, but I ended up driving to a hotel and leaving the truck in the lot. I made the delivery, but whenever I'm in that truck, I hear the sounds of my ghostly sin. 2 weeks ago, I sold the truck and walked away from the business forever. My boss was sorry to lose me, but I can't do it anymore. I'm terrified that I'll get sloppy and kill someone else, and I just can't trust my own senses anymore. The cops can say what they want, but I know what I did, and I know what I saw. Thought it might stop once I sold the truck, but I can still hear him calling for help when I close my eyes. No matter where I sleep, I'm still haunted by that ghostly scratching. As much as I want to, I fear there'll be no rest for me. Mr. Garvey gagged as the memory came up, and Dr. Winter whisked it away before he could come around. He was pleasant enough when he came back to himself, if not a little unsure of what he was doing there. Winter told him he had come in for a session, and it must have worked because, well, he couldn't remember anything. He thanked her for whatever he had needed to forget and told her that he would have to tell his friends what a great job she had done. Winter waved him out, but she knew it wouldn't fix what he was experiencing. She had seen the angry spirit, the one that floated above him like a storm cloud. That one would need more than just forgetting, but maybe Mr. Garvey deserved him. After all, everyone had to deal with the consequences of their sin, didn't they? You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our spooky skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our ghostly writer tier contributor. Thanks everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. my time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.